Welcome back everyone to the tutorial series. Today we will talk about two recording techniques called sweetening and striping. Let's start with a simpler one. On a lot of low-budget productions, we use a technique called sweetening, meaning most of the score is done with samples, and then we hire just a couple of players to play either the solo parts or they will play over the orchestral lines of the mock-up. It's most effective when you actually have solo parts, because our ears will automatically be drawn to the soloist, to the melody, since it's unmistakably real, and then the listener is fooled into believing that everything is real. So shifting the focus to a handful of live instruments, sweetening the mock-up is a very effective tool to create perceived realism and to give your music that extra human element. Now to striping. Almost any film score you hear these days will stripe during recording, meaning the different sections of the orchestra are recorded separately. You might have the strings come in one day or 2 days, and then they will record their bit of the entire score, maybe even together with the woodwinds, but sometimes you have the woodwinds come in on a different day. You'll have a separate day for the brass, and then a separate day for the percussion, or maybe a couple of hours just for the choir, or specialty instruments that you might need for your score. Rarely do you stripe with the whole orchestra sitting in the room. This would be reserved for productions where you really just have a lot of money to throw away. But you will also just bore the players to death. I've been on sessions where the whole orchestra was sitting in the room and then they were recording section by section. And I was talking to the brass players during a break and I was like, well, this is easy money for you. And they were not having it. They were just like, we wish we would actually have to work for our money because this is the most boring thing. We sit here for hours, sometimes playing 2 notes. We're mostly just on our phones doing nothing. It doesn't necessarily keep up the mojo and the focus of the players, so it's not necessarily the greatest idea to do it that way. Now, the striping technique has several advantages. 1, it gives the mixing engineer more flexibility. During the mix, and also more separated stems can be sent to the dub stage later, in turn giving the dub mixer also more flexibility. 2, it will make orchestra take edits much easier because now the different sections can be edited separately. So they all get their best take mixed in, and the samples can be blended into the final product more effectively. 3, if you have to go into overtime, you won't go into overtime with the whole orchestra. So you will save a lot of money. This was already done on a smaller scale with Orchestra A and Orchestra B sessions, when it was still common to record everyone together in the room. Not every cue needs the full orchestra, so you would plan ahead to have one full lineup for a day and then a smaller and therefore cheaper lineup for another day. You even chose the recording order in a way that you can let people go home throughout the day. If you can reduce the amount of players in the room charging you for their time, which is also something you do with striping. If, for example, I have a day of brass, but I only need the trumpets for, a couple of cues for half the day, then we'll record all the cues that need the full brass in the morning. Then during lunchtime, we let the trumpets go home and we'll record the rest of the brass in the afternoon. So planning out the sessions properly ahead of time can save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. 4, you can be more creative and cost-effective with the orchestra lineup in general, since you now have full control over volumes later on. So for example, on a lot of smaller or mid-budget productions, we can't always afford a full string section to balance out the brass. In that case, we have no choice but to record everyone separately. Otherwise, the brass would bleed into the string mics, and then there's no way to make the strings louder without also making the brass louder. There are some old school composers who claim that, those younger generations just can't write properly for orchestra anymore. We don't know how to orchestrate. And that's why we need to stripe. But that's actually not true. We just don't have the luxury that they used to enjoy, where you get a full-size orchestra every week, and you even often get a little bit of rehearsal time to balance out the volumes. We just don't have that anymore, and we don't really need it anymore. We can be a lot more cost-effective and flexible in our approach. So if your budget is such that you can only have 20 strings, 4 woodwinds against 8 brass, then there's no way you can actually naturally balance those out, especially in louder parts of the score, where all you will hear is brass. The disadvantages are usually tuning issues, often in the brass, since they can't hear the backing track on the headphones very well. It's much easier for the players to actually tune with one another and to perform together when they're actually physically playing together. And it's certainly more enjoyable for the players as well to play together and to, create a cohesive performance, even though I think the end result certainly profits from striping. Not only do the mixes sound cleaner and more balanced, and also more powerful, but you also get everyone's best performance. Imagine you have a cue and you basically edit together the best string performance of it, the best woodwind performance, and the best brass performance. For the strings, that might be take 2. For the brass, that might be take 3. If we record them all together, you might find yourself in scenarios where you had the perfect string performance, but then a trumpet messed up and essentially ruined that perfect string performance because now you can't separate them. So in my opinion, striping actually allows every section to shine. Another disadvantage that I alluded to in another video is that giving the dub stage too much flexibility and too many options can be detrimental for the music. Personally, I'd rather give them more control to make cleaner edits and to be able to manipulate a cue rather than cutting it out entirely or lowering the volume too much. But it has occurred on occasion, thankfully not on my own productions, that the music was altered so much that the composer could no longer identify their own work. So that's one of the dangers. Striping is also why we prepare the stems for recording sessions as shown in my Pro Tools session prep video. The link will be here or here. When we record strings, they of course are the first ones to record because they're usually on every cue, as opposed to other instruments that are only on select cues. And they need to hear what the other players will be playing during the other sessions. So we mute the sampled strings, but we will still let the rest of the orchestra play from the mock-up through headphones. The same goes for other sections. We only mute the instruments in the mock-up that we are recording in that session. It's a common misconception that the scores you hear in the movie or on the soundtracks are, one performance, when really many of the orchestra players never met, never even sat in a room together, let alone performed the score together. It's all heavily edited, the same as, pop and rock music, and then it's boosted up with samples to give it that larger-than-life Hollywood sound. A lot of times you even see making offs that are edited in a certain way to give the impression that everybody was playing together because it looks fancier and more exciting. There even have been productions where the production would book an extra session day or just an extra hour or two just to record the making of. So there would be a 3-hour session or something with a full orchestra, and they would just play for show for the cameras. There's a handful of composers that still record everyone together, like John Williams or Michael Giacchino. But for the most part, striping is the more common technique, and personally my preferred way of recording.